At 14:23 on the afternoon of February 8, 1944, Technical Sergeant William Hartley watched a 20-millimeter cannon shell punch through the tail section of his B-17 Flying Fortress and realized he had approximately 8 seconds before the entire aircraft disintegrated. Around him, he was 23 years old, a carpenter's son from Portland, Maine. This was his 19th combat mission over Germany. The statistical analysis said crews rarely survived past their 25th mission. Hartley was running out of borrowed time, and he knew it. The tail gunner position on a B-17 was the loneliest place in war, separated from the rest of the crew by 50 feet of aluminum fuselage. Sitting on a bicycle seat with your back to a thin steel plate that would stop nothing larger than rifle rounds, 2 50-caliber machine guns as your only companions. And when the Messerschmitts came screaming out of the sun with cannons blazing, you were the first man they wanted dead, because attacking from directly behind put them in the firing arc of exactly one person, you. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Hartley's B-17 was named Memphis Queen after the pilot's hometown sweetheart. A blonde girl with a painted smile adorned the nose. Beneath her were 17 mission markers. 17 times this aircraft had flown into German airspace and returned. 17 times 10 men had climbed aboard, knowing the odds said some of them would not come back. The crew chief had told Hartley before takeoff that morning that Memphis Queen was living on borrowed luck, that the law of averages was catching up, that this might be the mission where their number came up. The target was Schweinfurt. Again, the ball-bearing factories that kept the German war machine turning. The 8th Air Force had already tried to destroy them twice. Lost 60 bombers in a single afternoon during the October raid. 600 men killed or captured in one mission. The Germans had rebuilt the factories, strengthened the defenses, added more anti-aircraft guns, more fighter squadrons. Schweinfurt had become a killing ground, a place where American bombers went to die. And now they were going back. 284 B-17 seconds had taken off from bases across England that morning, flying in tight defensive boxes, each bomber positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire. The theory was simple. Pack them close enough and their combined firepower would drive off enemy fighters. The reality was that flak explosions and colliding aircraft killed almost as many men as German guns, but there was no alternative. Daylight precision bombing required flying straight and level over the target. No evasive maneuvers, no fancy flying. Just hold formation and pray the bombs hit and pray you survive long enough to turn for home. Memphis Queen had crossed the Dutch coast at 24,000 feet. The temperature at altitude was 42 degrees below zero. Hartley wore an electrically heated flight suit, but the cold still crept through. His breath froze on his oxygen mask. His fingers went numb inside his gloves. The machine guns were cold enough to freeze skin on contact. Everything at this altitude wanted to kill you. The cold, the thin air, the German fighters, the flak. Death had 1,000 faces, and they were all watching. The German fighters had hit them over the Ruhr Valley. Focke-Wulf, 190 seconds diving from above. Messerschmitt BF, 109 seconds climbing from below. Coordinated attacks designed to shred the bomber formations. Hartley had tracked targets through his gun sight and squeezed the triggers, felt the recoil slam through his shoulders, watched tracer rounds arc across the sky. One Focke-Wulf had taken hits and spiraled away, trailing black smoke, his first confirmed kill. No time to celebrate. More fighters were coming, always more fighters. The intercom crackled with voices. The pilot calling out fighter positions. The top turret gunner reporting hits on a Messerschmitt. The waist gunners shouting warnings. Then static. Then nothing. Communications had failed. Hartley was alone in the tail, with no way to know what was happening forward. No way to coordinate. No way to call for help. Just him and his guns and the German fighters that kept coming in waves. Flak had opened up as they approached Schweinfurt, black bursts filling the sky. Each explosion sent shrapnel tearing through aluminum like paper. Hartley watched a B-17 inches the formation ahead take a direct hit. The wing folded. The aircraft tumbled from the sky. Parachutes blossomed. Maybe 4. The bomber carried 10 men. 6 were already dead. The mathematics of survival playing out in real time. You flew 25 missions or you died trying. Most died trying. Memphis Queen shuddered as flak fragments punctured the fuselage. Hartley heard impacts, felt the aircraft lurch. Something was wrong. The bomber was losing altitude, falling behind the formation. A damaged B-17 struggling to keep up was a death sentence. German fighter pilots watched for stragglers. A lone bomber without the protection of massed defensive fire was easy prey. Hartley saw them coming. A dozen Messerschmitts positioning for the kill. This was it. This was the mission where their luck ran out. The first fighter came in from 6 o'clock low, directly behind and beneath the bomber. Hartley pressed against his steel chest plate and fired. The .50 calibers roared. Spent brass casings clattered around his feet. The Messerschmitt broke off, but there were more. So many more. They attacked in pairs. One would draw his attention while the other lined up a killing shot. Luftwaffe tactics refined over years of war. German pilots who knew exactly how to kill a flying fortress. Target the engines first. Knock out the power. Then work on the gunners. Eliminate the defensive fire. Finally, pour cannon rounds into the cockpit and bomb bay until something vital breaks. Hartley had seen it happen to other bombers. Watched them burn. Watched them fall. Watched men die at 24,000 feet. Now it was happening to him. Now he was the target. Now Memphis Queen was the bomber struggling to survive against overwhelming odds. A Focke-Wulf came in from 4 o'clock high. Hartley swung his guns and tracked the fighter. Fired a burst. Missed. The German pilot rolled and came back around. This time his aim was better. 20mm cannon shells walked across the tail section. Hartley felt impacts. Heard tearing metal. Something slammed into his right shoulder. Then his left leg. Both wounds in quick succession. The pain was immediate and white-hot. Blood soaked through his flight suit. He looked down and saw holes in the fabric. Through the holes he could see meat and bone. But his hands still worked. His fingers could still grip the triggers. That was all that mattered. Keep fighting. Keep shooting. Keep the fighters away, even if it killed him. Because if he stopped firing, if he gave them an opening, they would pour cannon fire into the bomber until everyone aboard was dead. His crew, his brothers, the men he had trained with and flown with and trusted with his life. He would die before he let them down. More impacts. The vertical stabilizer above him took multiple hits. Control cables snapped, whipped through the compartment like steel serpents. The tail section vibrated violently. Something was very wrong with the aircraft. Hartley glanced at his parachute. Every airman wore one. Silk canopy packed into a canvas container strapped to the chest. If the bomber went down, it was your only chance. Hartley saw holes in his parachute pack. Multiple holes. Cannon rounds had shredded it. The silk was torn. The parachute was useless. If he had to bail out, he would fall 4.5 miles to his death. Forward in the nose section, Bombardier Lieutenant James Keller was still conscious. He had released the bombs over Schweinfurt. 4,000 pounds of high explosives tumbling toward the factories below. Mission accomplished. Now they just had to survive the flight home. But the bomber was dying. Number 3 engine was on fire. Number 2 was losing oil pressure. The hydraulics had failed, the oxygen system was leaking, and German fighters were circling like sharks around wounded prey. The pilot was dead. Captain Michael Torres, 26 years old, from Albuquerque, New Mexico. A piece of flak had entered through the windscreen and removed the top of his skull. The co-pilot, Lieutenant David Song, was fighting to control the aircraft alone. But without the pilot, without full power, without the protection of the formation, Memphis Queen was finished. It was only a question of how many crew members would survive to become prisoners of war. Another cannon round struck the bomber. This one hit something critical. Hartley felt the aircraft lurch violently. A grinding sound echoed through the airframe, metal screaming against metal. The vibration intensified until his vision blurred. Then came a sound he would never forget, the shriek of structural failure, the scream of an aircraft tearing itself apart. Memphis Queen was breaking in half. The fuselage split just aft of the radio room. Hartley watched in frozen horror as the front section separated and fell away. The wings, the engines, the cockpit, the nose section, all of it tumbling toward Germany 4.5 miles below. Lieutenant Keller was in that nose section. The co-pilot, the navigator, the bombardier, the flight engineer, the radio operator, the ball turret gunner. 7 men falling to their deaths or their parachutes if they had time to jump. Hartley would never know which. He was alone now, trapped in a severed tail section, wounded in the shoulder and leg, his parachute destroyed, 24,000 feet above enemy territory, falling. The laws of physics were absolute and merciless. Terminal velocity for a human body was approximately 120 miles per hour. The tail section of a B-17 weighed several thousand pounds. It would fall faster, much faster. William Hartley had perhaps 90 seconds to live. The severed tail section tumbled through the sky, spinning, rotating, throwing Hartley against the walls of his compartment. His wounded shoulders screamed with pain. Blood sprayed across the interior. The wind howled through the torn fuselage where the rest of the aircraft had been. He could see the ground far below. Farmland, forests, roads, German countryside rushing up to meet him at terminal velocity. This was how he would die. Not shot down, not burned, just falling. Just physics and gravity and the absolute certainty of impact. But William Hartley did something that defied all logic and reason. He did not curl into a ball and wait for death. He did not scream or pray or surrender to the inevitable. Instead, he grabbed his machine guns, positioned them as best he could despite the spinning, and he kept firing. The German fighters were still circling, still watching the tail section fall. Perhaps they wanted to confirm the kill. Perhaps they were curious. Perhaps they had never seen anything like this before. Whatever their reason, they made a fatal mistake. They flew within range. Hartley squeezed the triggers. The .50 calibers roared even as the tail section spun through the air. Tracers arced wildly across the sky. The recoil pushed against him, gave him something to hold on to, something to focus on besides the certainty of death. He was falling 4.5 miles and he was still shooting, still fighting, still refusing to die quietly. The German pilots scattered. They had never seen this before. A man in a falling coffin firing back at them with everything he had. One Messerschmitt took hits across the fuselage. The pilot broke off and dove toward the ground trailing smoke. Hartley did not know if it was a kill, did not care. He just kept firing, kept fighting, kept proving that Americans did not surrender, did not quit, did not go gentle into that good night. If he was going to die, he would die as a Marine. Wait, he was not a Marine. He was Army Air Forces. But the principle was the same. You fought until you could not fight anymore. You never gave up. You never stopped. The altimeter was shattered, but Hartley could see the ground growing larger. 5,000 feet, 4,000, 3,000. The tail section was not falling straight down. The vertical stabilizer and horizontal stabilizers were acting like crude wings, creating drag, catching air. Instead of plummeting, the wreckage was gliding, badly, uncontrollably. But gliding nonetheless. The descent was almost manageable, almost survivable, almost. 2,000 feet, 1,000. Hartley braced himself against the steel framework, wrapped his wounded arms around the ammunition cans. There was nothing else to hold on to, nothing else to do but wait for impact. The tail section struck the top of a forest, pine trees. The vertical stabilizer caught on a trunk and tore away. The wreckage cartwheeled through the canopy. Branches snapped. Metal screamed. Hartley's head slammed into the framework. His vision exploded into white light. He felt ribs crack. His wounded leg bent at an impossible angle. The tail section hit another tree, spun sideways, crashed into the frozen German earth with a sound like the world ending. Then silence. Complete and absolute silence. William Hartley was alive. Barely, impossibly. Against every law of physics and probability, he lay in the wreckage, unable to move, unable to think, unable to process what had just happened. He had fallen 4.5 miles from the sky. The tail section had shielded him. The trees had slowed his descent. The frozen ground had absorbed some of the impact. He should be dead. By every rational measure, he should be dead. But he was breathing. His heart was beating. He was alive. The inventory of injuries was catastrophic. Both arms were broken, compound fractures with bone protruding through skin. His right shoulder was dislocated. Multiple ribs were shattered. His left leg was broken in at least 3 places. And there was something wrong with his head. A wound above his right eye. He could feel blood running down his face. Could feel the cold air touching something that should not be exposed. Part of his skull had been torn away. His brain was partially exposed to the freezing German winter. The pain was extraordinary, beyond anything he had imagined possible. Every breath brought stabbing agony. Every slight movement sent fresh waves of suffering through his broken body. He tried to call out, but his throat was raw. Tried to move, but nothing responded. He was trapped in the wreckage, trapped in enemy territory, trapped in a body that was destroying itself from the inside. Without medical attention, he would die within hours. With medical attention, he would probably die anyway. The injuries were too severe, too extensive. No one survived this much damage. Voices echoed through the forest. German voices. Soldiers coming to investigate the crash. They would find an American airman with catastrophic injuries. An enemy who had just bombed their cities, killed their civilians, destroyed their factories. What they would do with him was uncertain. Some German soldiers treated prisoners according to the Geneva Convention. Others did not. Hartley had no way to know which kind was approaching, no way to defend himself, no way to fight or flee. He could only wait and hope that mercy existed somewhere in this frozen hell. The German soldiers emerged from the trees with rifles raised. They surrounded the wreckage and stared at the American lying in the snow. One of them shouted something. Another ran back toward the road. The rest just stood there, looking at Hartley like he was a ghost, like he was something impossible, like he was a man who should not exist. One soldier knelt beside him, young, maybe 19. He examined Hartley's wounds and shook his head, said something in German that Hartley did not understand, but the tone was clear. This man was dying. There was nothing to be done. They loaded him onto a wooden cart. No stretcher, no medical supplies, no morphine for the pain, just rough hands dragging him from the wreckage and dumping him onto wood. Every movement was agony. Hartley screamed. The soldiers ignored him. They had orders. Downed airmen were to be captured if possible. Dead airmen provided no intelligence. So they would transport him somewhere, let someone else decide what to do with him, whether to try to save him or let him die. The cart bounced along frozen roads. Every jolt sent fresh agony through Hartley's broken body. He drifted in and out of consciousness, woke to pain, lost consciousness again, woke to more pain. The cycle repeated for what felt like hours, maybe days. Time had lost all meaning. There was only pain and cold and the certainty that he was dying slowly in the back of a German cart. The cart stopped at a military hospital, a converted school building somewhere in occupied territory. German medical personnel performed triage on incoming casualties. Their own soldiers received priority. Allied prisoners came second, or third, or last, depending on how many German wounded needed treatment. Hartley's injuries placed him firmly in the category of probably dying. Not worth the medical resources, not worth the precious antibiotics and morphine and surgical time. Better to let nature take its course. But the hospital held a secret. Among the staff were 2 French doctors, military physicians, captured in 1940, pressed into service, treating German and Allied wounded. They had been working in the hospital for 4 years, had saved hundreds of lives, had performed surgeries under impossible conditions with inadequate equipment. The Germans allowed this because it freed their own doctors for more important patients. The French doctors had become invisible, trusted, given more autonomy than normal prisoners. The French doctors examined Hartley and saw the extent of his injuries. Both arms shattered, multiple rib fractures, broken leg, exposed brain tissue, massive blood loss, severe infection already setting in. By any rational measure, this man was already dead. Surgery would be pointless, a waste of resources, a waste of time. They should let him die peacefully. Give him morphine for the pain, and let nature run its course. That was the logical choice, the sensible choice, the choice that preserved medical resources for soldiers who actually had a chance. But the older French doctor looked at Hartley's face and saw his own son, who had died in 1940 during the fall of France, 22 years old, killed by German artillery. The doctor had never recovered from that loss, had never forgiven himself for not being there, for not protecting his son, for surviving when his boy had not. And now here was another young man, same age, same broken body, same desperate need. The doctor made a decision that defied all logic. He would try to save this American, not because it made sense, not because he had adequate resources, simply because he was a physician, and this was a wounded man who deserved a chance. The surgery lasted 9 hours. They worked with instruments designed for field operations. No proper anesthesia, just local numbing agents that barely dulled the pain. Hartley screamed, passed out, woke screaming again. The doctors worked methodically, setting broken bones with metal pins and wire, cleaning infected tissue, removing bone fragments from the skull, covering the exposed brain with what tissue they could salvage, creating a crude metal plate to protect the wound, splinting the arms, setting the leg, doing everything possible with almost nothing available. When the surgery ended, the senior French doctor told Hartley the truth through a translator. You have 72 hours. Your body must fight the infection. Your bones must begin healing. Your brain must avoid swelling. We have done all we can. The rest is up to you. You must choose to live. You must fight, because if you surrender now, if you give up, you will die. Hartley understood. Survival was a choice, not a passive thing that happened to you. An active decision you made every moment, to keep breathing, to keep fighting, to refuse death even when death seemed easier. He had survived a 4.5-mile fall, had kept firing his guns while falling through the sky, had crashed through trees at terminal velocity and lived. He had not done all that just to die on a hospital bed. He would fight, he would survive, he would live. The fever came on the first night. Hartley's temperature climbed to 105 degrees. His body shook with violent chills. Sweat poured from his skin. The French doctors monitored him as closely as their limited resources allowed, changed his bandages, forced water between his cracked lips, waited to see if his immune system could win the war raging inside his blood. Infection was the great killer. Antibiotics existed, but were almost impossible to obtain. The doctors had cleaned his wounds as thoroughly as possible, but bacteria had entered his bloodstream. Now his body had to fight alone. The second night was worse. Hartley slipped into delirium. He relived the mission, the fighters attacking, the tail section separating, the fall. He screamed warnings to crew members who were already dead, called out for his mother, begged for morphine they could not give him. The other patients in the ward listened to his ravings and wondered if he would survive. The French doctors took turns sitting with him. They had no medicine to offer, just their presence. Just cold cloths pressed against his burning forehead. Just whispered encouragement in French-accented English that he probably could not hear. On the third morning, the fever broke. Hartley opened his eyes and recognized his surroundings. He was alive. The infection had not killed him. His immune system had won the battle. The French doctors examined his wounds and found the first signs of healing. The tissue around the skull plate was beginning to close. The broken bones were starting to knit. Recovery would take months, perhaps years. He would never be whole again, but he was going to survive. Word spread through the hospital. The American who fell 4.5 miles without a parachute, the tail gunner who kept shooting as his bomber disintegrated. The man who should have died a dozen times but refused to stop breathing. German guards came to look at him. Other prisoners asked to hear his story. Even the hospital administrators seemed impressed. The French doctors had saved his life, but they could not protect him forever. Once Hartley was stable enough to travel, he would be transferred to a permanent prisoner of war camp. The hospital was just a way station, a place where wounded men were patched together before being sent into the German POW system. 6 weeks after the crash, Hartley could walk again, barely, with crutches. His arms were still splinted. The metal plate in his skull caused constant headaches. His ribs ached with every breath. But he was mobile, conscious, ready for transfer. The Germans processed him with bureaucratic efficiency. Name, rank, serial number, service branch, unit assignment. They photographed him for their records. A thin young man with hollow cheeks and bandaged arms, staring into the camera with eyes that had seen too much. His first permanent camp was Stalag Luft III in Silesia, a compound designed to hold captured Allied airmen. Barbed wire fences, guard towers with machine guns, wooden barracks that offered little protection against the brutal European winter. Thousands of American and British airmen filled the camp. Pilots, navigators, bombardiers, gunners, men who had been shot down over Germany and occupied Europe. Some had been prisoners for years. Others had arrived only weeks before Hartley. All of them shared the same fate: captivity until the war ended or they died. Whichever came first. Hartley found a strange community behind the wire. Prisoners organized themselves into units, maintained military discipline, created libraries from donated books, held classes in everything from mathematics to foreign languages, built secret radios to monitor BBC broadcasts, planned escapes that rarely succeeded. The famous tunnel escape from Stalag Luft III would happen just weeks after Hartley arrived. 76 men would escape. 73 would be recaptured. 50 would be executed. The mathematics of survival playing out again. Most who tried to escape died trying. The camp provided minimal rations: thin soup, black bread, occasionally potatoes or turnips. Red Cross packages supplemented the diet when they arrived, but deliveries were unpredictable. Most prisoners lost 20 or 30 pounds during their captivity. Some lost more. Hartley's body continued healing. His arms regained function, though they would never be as strong as before. The headaches from his skull injury became less frequent. The nightmares about the fall never stopped. In January 1945, Soviet forces began advancing from the east. Allied armies were pushing from the west. Germany was being crushed between two unstoppable forces. The prisoners could hear distant artillery, could see German guards growing nervous. Something was about to change. On January 27th, the change came. Soviet troops were approaching the camp. German commanders ordered an immediate evacuation. All prisoners would march west on foot. Destination unknown. Duration unknown. Refusal meant execution. The prisoners assembled in the frozen compound. Temperatures had dropped to 15 degrees below zero. Many men had no winter coats, no gloves, no proper boots. They had been surviving on starvation rations for months, and now they were expected to walk across Germany in the coldest winter in decades. The column stretched for miles. Thousands of Allied airmen trudging through snow and ice. German guards marched alongside with rifles ready. Anyone who fell behind would be shot. Anyone who tried to escape would be shot. Walk or die. Those were the only options. Hartley had survived a 4.5-mile fall from the sky, survived catastrophic injuries, survived crude surgery and raging infection. Now he faced hundreds of miles of frozen roads with a body that had never fully healed. His arms were weak. His leg ached with every step. The metal plate in his skull conducted the cold directly into his brain. But he put one foot in front of the other and refused to stop. Behind him lay months of captivity. Ahead lay an uncertain number of miles through enemy territory. Somewhere beyond that, if he could survive long enough, lay freedom. The march that would later be called the Long March ground forward through January and February of 1945. Prisoners walked 15 to 20 miles each day through snow that sometimes reached their knees. They slept in frozen barns or on open ground. They ate raw potatoes stolen from fields and drank melted snow because the streams were contaminated. Men died around Hartley daily. Some collapsed in the snow and never got up. Others developed fevers that consumed them within hours. Guards shot prisoners who could not keep pace. The column left a trail of bodies across Germany. But Hartley kept walking. He had not survived the fall to die on a frozen road. He had not endured months of healing to surrender to exhaustion. Something inside him refused to quit. The same stubborn determination that had kept him firing his machine guns as Memphis Queen disintegrated around him. The same refusal to accept death that had carried him through surgery and fever and infection. He would survive this too. He would make it home. He would see his family again. That was not hope. That was certainty. A decision he had made and would not reconsider. By April, the column had covered nearly 400 miles. The prisoners could hear Allied artillery growing louder each day. American and British forces were closing in from the west. Soviet armies were advancing from the east. Germany was collapsing. Liberation was coming. On April 29, 1945, the march ended. American soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division intercepted the column near the Elbe River. The German guards threw down their weapons and surrendered. The prisoners stood in stunned silence. After months of marching, after years of captivity, after countless moments when death seemed certain, they were free. Hartley weighed 87 pounds. He had entered the Army Air Forces at 160. The crash, the surgeries, the camps, the march, all of it had stripped away nearly half his body weight. He looked like a skeleton wrapped in skin, but he was alive. Medical personnel rushed to treat the liberated prisoners. Many required immediate hospitalization. Typhus had spread through the column during the march. Pneumonia was rampant. Frostbite had claimed fingers and toes that would need amputation. The Army processed Hartley's case with growing astonishment. His service record documented the impossible. Shot down over Schweinfurt on February 8, 1944. Aircraft destroyed by enemy action. Fell 24,000 feet in severed tail section without functional parachute. Survived impact. Captured by enemy forces. Held as prisoner of war for 15 months. Survived forced march of approximately 400 miles. Military historians would later confirm that only a handful of Allied airmen in the entire Second World War survived falls of comparable distance without parachutes. William Hartley was one of them. The Army awarded Hartley 2 Purple Hearts for wounds sustained in combat, the Air Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster for his service with the 8th Air Force, the European Theater Medal, the Prisoner of War Medal. They gave him an honorable discharge on November 1, 1945. The 8th Air Force had lost thousands of men during the war, hundreds of aircraft destroyed. Memphis Queen was just one more statistic, but Hartley's survival was a statistical anomaly, an impossibility that had somehow become reality. News of his fall had spread even during the war. Radio operators had intercepted German broadcasts describing an American who fell 4.5 miles and lived. The story reached Portland, where Hartley's family had spent months not knowing if he was alive or dead. Letters arrived from the War Department, missing in action, then prisoner of war, then liberated. The emotional whiplash was almost unbearable. But finally, in December 1945, William Hartley returned home. The man who stepped off the train in Portland was not the same man who had left. He was 24 years old but looked 40. The metal plate in his skull was visible beneath his skin. His arms hung at strange angles. He walked with a pronounced limp. His eyes held memories that would never fade. The roar of engines, the chatter of machine guns, the moment when Memphis Queen broke in half and he realized he was going to fall 4.5 miles to his death. Those memories did not fade. They never would. Hartley married 6 months after returning home. Mary Sullivan, a local girl who had known him before the war. She saw past the physical scars and the hollow eyes and the nightmares that woke him screaming. She saw the man underneath the damage. They built a life together in Portland, had 4 children: Robert, Patricia, Michael, Susan. Hartley rarely spoke about the war. Not to his wife, not to his children, not to anyone who asked. The experiences were too painful, the losses too profound. 6 crew members had died when Memphis Queen broke apart. Countless friends had perished in the camps and on the march. Talking about it meant reliving it. The physical wounds never fully healed. The metal plate in his skull caused headaches for the rest of his life. His arms remained weak and prone to pain. His leg ached when storms approached. His body carried the evidence of February 8, 1944, until his final breath. But Hartley lived. He raised his family. He worked as a carpenter like his father. He attended church on Sundays and watched his grandchildren grow. He outlived most of his fellow prisoners and nearly all his crew members. In 2006, the Veterans History Project contacted him. They were documenting oral histories from World War II veterans, creating a permanent record before that generation passed away. Hartley agreed to be interviewed. For the first time in 60 years, he told the complete story: the mission, the fighters, the fall, the French doctors, the camps, the march, the liberation. A filmmaker was present during the interview. The footage would eventually become part of a documentary about miraculous survivals in World War II. On September 15, 2008, the town of Portland honored Hartley by dedicating a memorial at the Veterans Park. A bronze plaque describing his service, his fall, his survival, his refusal to quit. The ceremony was attended by family, friends, veterans from later wars who had been inspired by his story. The mayor spoke about courage, about perseverance, about the kind of man who keeps firing his guns while falling from the sky, about the kind of American who represents the best of what the country can produce. Hartley gave a brief speech. His voice was weak, his hands shook, but his words were clear. I was just doing my job. Every man in my crew was doing his job. The ones who died were no less brave than me. I survived because of luck and physics and 2 French doctors who chose to save an enemy. I lived well because Mary chose to love a broken man. I have no regrets except for the friends who didn't make it home. Tell their stories. Remember their names. Make sure they're not forgotten. William Hartley died peacefully in his sleep on March 7, 2011. He was 90 years old. 67 years had passed since the day German fighters cut his bomber in half and sent him tumbling 4.5 miles toward Earth. 67 years since he kept firing his machine guns while the world spun around him. 67 years since French doctors saved his life with crude tools and impossible skill. His obituary noted that he lived by a simple philosophy borrowed from a fellow POW. We didn't survive the war to waste the peace. Words he had lived by every single day. The tail gunner position on a B-17 was the loneliest spot on the aircraft, separated from the crew. First target for enemy fighters, last to know if the bomber was going down. William Hartley occupied that position on February 8, 1944. And when his aircraft disintegrated around him, he did not curl up and wait for death. He kept shooting all the way down. He survived the impossible, lived a full life, raised a family, made a difference, and now his story survives him. A testament to the human will to live, to fight, to never surrender even when death seems certain. If this story moved you the way it moved us, hit that like button right now. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We rescue forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about tail gunners who fell from the sky, ordinary men who refused to die, real people, real heroism, real courage that deserves to be remembered. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia. Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure William Hartley does not disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.